President-elect Obama is back in Chicago now.
Back in 2008, my first year working for NBC News, I not only looked different, I sounded different too.
Savannah Guthrie broadcasts live on the NBC network as the highly professional main anchor of the Today Show. However, behind this incredibly strong public appearance lies a continuous series of severe personal tragedies that originally began with the sudden physical death of her father in 1988 and eventually reached a terrifying peak during the year 2026, when a sudden threat to her elderly mother's life forced Savannah to immediately abandon her live television program. Her life, filled with constant turmoil and tragedy, left her with no room for weakness. During the year 1988, when Savannah Guthrie was 16 years old and living with her family in the city of Tucson in the state of Arizona, her father, Charles Guthrie, traveled to the country of Mexico in order to conduct professional business activities while he was working inside Mexico. Charles Guthrie suddenly suffered a massive and fatal heart attack that caused his immediate physical death, which instantly destroyed the established structure of the Guthrie family within a single night. Because Charles had served as the primary financial provider for the household, his sudden death created an immediate economic and logistical crisis for his surviving widow, Nancy Guthrie, who suddenly had to take full responsibility for raising 3 growing children entirely by herself. In order to manage this severe family crisis and ensure that her children had enough resources to survive, Nancy Guthrie transformed herself into an incredibly strict and resilient individual who tightly controlled the family bank accounts, worked constantly to generate income, and absolutely refused to display any physical signs of crying or emotional distress in front of her sons and daughters. Because Savannah spent her teenage years observing her mother's daily reactions to their family tragedy, she directly absorbed her mother's specific psychological coping mechanisms and learned a fundamental life lesson which dictated that she must never allow herself to be weak under any circumstances. Instead of requesting professional psychological therapy or openly discussing her deep emotional pain regarding her father's unexpected death, the 16-year-old Savannah decided to suppress her internal grief by completely dedicating all of her daily waking hours to rigorous academic studying and educational advancement. She achieved exceptionally high grades during her remaining time at her local high school, which allowed her to gain admission to the University of Arizona, where she successfully completed a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism during the year 1993. Because she remained totally committed to building an impenetrable psychological defense system through continuous hard work. She later applied to Georgetown University and completed a highly demanding Doctor of Law degree in 2002, proving that the severe childhood trauma from 1988 had fundamentally defined her personality by forcing her to reject any form of emotional surrender for several consecutive decades. Although Savannah experienced rapid and highly visible success in her professional journalism career, her private adult life contained multiple hidden failures and severe physical traumas that she constantly concealed from the general public. During the year 2005, Savannah entered her first legal marriage with a man named Mark Orchard, but after 4 years of living together as husband and wife, the couple officially filed legal divorce documents and permanently ended their relationship in 2009. When the legal divorce procedures were finally completed, the 37-year-old Savannah simply packed her personal belongings into moving boxes, relocated to a completely different residential address, and continued to execute her daily reporting shifts at the NBC News Corporation without ever missing a single day of work or announcing her private marital failure to her television viewers. During the month of March in 2014, Savannah legally married her second husband, Michael Feldman, and because she was already 42 years old at the time of the wedding ceremony, the couple immediately decided to pursue medical options in order to conceive a child as quickly as possible. Because the natural human aging process makes biological reproduction significantly more difficult for women over the age of 40. Savannah's physical body struggled heavily during the initial fertility treatments, which eventually resulted in a tragic medical situation where she suffered a painful miscarriage. During a specific medical examination, her private doctor looked at the ultrasound machine and explicitly informed Savannah that the growing fetus inside her body no longer possessed a beating heart, which forced Savannah to silently accept the devastating news, leave the medical clinic, and drive her car back to her apartment. Despite experiencing this severe physical and emotional loss, Savannah woke up exactly at 3 a.m. the very next morning, applied her standard television makeup, traveled to the Manhattan broadcasting studio, and read the morning news scripts with perfect professional fluency without ever reporting her miscarriage to the NBC network executives or sharing the tragic information with her national audience. After eventually recovering from the physical trauma of the miscarriage, Savannah successfully carried 2 pregnancies to full term, physically giving birth to her daughter, Vale Guthrie Feldman, on August 13, 2014, and later delivering her son, Charles Max Feldman, on December 8, 2016, when she was 44 years old. Taking on the massive responsibility of late motherhood while simultaneously functioning as a highly paid television star created an enormous physical burden on Savannah's body, which required her to maintain an incredibly strict and punishing daily schedule that left absolutely no room for personal rest or relaxation. Every single night, Savannah forced herself to sleep at exactly 8 p.m. so that she could wake up at 3 a.m., drive her vehicle to Studio 1A in New York City at 4 a.m., participate in editorial planning meetings at 5 a.m., and broadcast live national news from 7 a.m. until 9 a.m. After she finished her television broadcasting duties, she immediately returned to her private apartment so that she could personally feed her 2 young infants, physically bathe them in the tub, and put them to sleep, deliberately choosing to execute these domestic chores herself instead of hiring a full-time professional nanny to replace her as a mother. Even though this relentless combination of high-level journalism and intensive childcare caused her body to become chronically exhausted from a severe lack of sleep, Savannah absolutely refused to complain to her colleagues because she was still strictly following the old family rule of never collapsing that she had learned from her mother decades earlier. The absolutely most severe and dangerous event in Savannah Guthrie's entire life occurred on January 31st, 2026, when an unknown group of individuals deliberately disabled the electronic security camera system at Nancy Guthrie's private residence in Tucson, Arizona, and physically removed the 84-year-old woman from her home. When the local Arizona police officers arrived to inspect the disrupted property, they quickly discovered a digital USB storage drive resting on the living room table, which contained a specific text document that officially transformed the missing persons case into a high-stakes financial extortion crime. The criminal organization used the text document to demand a massive ransom payment of $6 million, and they explicitly instructed the family to transfer this entire amount exclusively into an anonymous digital Bitcoin wallet before a strictly assigned deadline. The situation became incredibly terrifying because the kidnappers absolutely refused to provide any recent photographs, video recordings, or audio files that could serve as concrete physical proof that the 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was actually still alive inside their captivity. The specific physical condition of Nancy Guthrie immediately placed the entire criminal investigation into a state of extreme medical emergency because the 84-year-old woman suffered from severe chronic cardiovascular disease and relied on a specialized medical pacemaker that doctors had surgically implanted inside her chest cavity. Furthermore, Nancy was legally required to consume specific daily dosages of prescription blood-thinning pills and highly specialized heart rhythm medications. But the police confirmed that the kidnappers had not allowed her to take any of her medicine bottles when they violently removed her from the Arizona residence. The medical experts informed the law enforcement officials that an 84-year-old human body could not possibly survive without these specific prescription medications for more than 72 hours, because the sudden lack of chemical intervention would inevitably cause her blood pressure to spike dangerously high and force her damaged heart to experience a fatal biological failure. When Savannah received the terrifying telephone call regarding the kidnapping situation, she was actively preparing for her morning television broadcast in New York, but she immediately canceled all of her scheduled appearances, packed her personal clothing into a travel suitcase, and purchased a commercial airline ticket so she could fly directly from John F. Kennedy International Airport to the state of Arizona. Before she boarded her outbound flight, Savannah utilized her financial resources to hire a specialized private security firm, instructing the armed guards to stand outside her Manhattan apartment and physically protect her two young children, Vale and Charlie, from any potential secondary attacks by the criminal organization. Upon arriving in the city of Tucson, Savannah immediately traveled to the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where federal agents had already taken total control over the kidnapping case due to the incredibly large ransom demand and the highly complex nature of the international cryptocurrency extortion tactics. Savannah officially designated herself as the sole public spokesperson and primary decision-maker for the Guthrie family, which required her to sit inside the federal interrogation rooms for multiple consecutive hours while handing over her mother's detailed hospital records, providing the exact serial number of the implanted pacemaker, and sharing all of Nancy's personal banking information. While the federal cybersecurity agents attempted to trace the anonymous Bitcoin wallet across various digital servers, Savannah initiated multiple phone calls to her private bankers and financial advisors, legally instructing them to begin liquidating her personal real estate properties and stock portfolios so that she could successfully gather the demanded $6 million before the criminal's deadline expired. This horrifying sequence of events in 2026 directly activated Savannah's deeply repressed psychological trauma from the year 1988, because she was once again facing the sudden and violent loss of a parent without having any control over the external circumstances or any ability to communicate with her family member. However, instead of collapsing under the extreme emotional pressure, Savannah automatically activated her oldest childhood defense mechanism, completely refusing to shed a single tear in front of the federal agents and purposefully treating the entire hostage crisis as a purely legal and journalistic problem that needed to be solved through data analysis and logistical planning. While Savannah was aggressively coordinating with the federal agents and managing the massive financial ransom logistics in Arizona, her longtime television co-host and closest personal friend, a 61-year-old woman named Hoda Kotb, took complete responsibility for managing the media narrative and providing vital support from the NBC headquarters in New York. During the early months of 2026, Hoda Kotb had already transitioned into a highly comfortable semi-retirement schedule, which allowed her to work significantly fewer hours, and she had specifically booked airline tickets and hotel accommodations to travel to Milan, Italy, where she was scheduled to report on the upcoming Winter Olympic Games. When Hoda received the confidential information regarding the violent kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie, she immediately grabbed her telephone and directly called the president of the NBC News division, explicitly demanding that the network cancel her expensive international trip to Italy so that she could stay in the United States and help her friend. Hoda successfully convinced the network executives to let her abandon her Olympic reporting duties and return to the punishing 3 a.m. daily schedule so that she could temporarily take over Savannah's main anchoring chair, which successfully prevented Savannah from violating her employment contract or losing her television income during the prolonged crisis. On the morning of February 2, 2026, Hoda Kotb deliberately used her powerful position on live national television to address the kidnapping crisis directly, looking straight into the broadcasting camera to deliver a highly specific and factual 45-second statement to the American public. Using extremely simple and direct language, Hoda explained to the viewers that when her own adopted daughter, Hope, suffered a severe medical emergency and was admitted to the hospital's intensive care unit in 2023, Savannah Guthrie was the very first person who canceled her work schedule, traveled to the medical facility, and physically sat beside Hoda to provide protection and comfort. Hoda concluded her television broadcast by firmly declaring that because Savannah had faithfully protected her family during a previous medical crisis, Hoda was now officially dedicating all of her daily efforts to supporting Savannah and ensuring that the public would not ignore the critical situation regarding the missing 84-year-old woman. Immediately following this live television announcement, Hoda executed a highly visible physical campaign inside Studio 1A by bringing hundreds of bright yellow ribbons, which represent the traditional American cultural symbol for patiently awaiting the safe return of a missing family member, and personally distributing them to the entire NBC production staff. Hoda walked around the television studio and used safety pins to attach these yellow ribbons onto the daily uniforms of the camera operators, the professional makeup artists, the sound engineering directors, and the studio assistants, ensuring that every single employee visible on the camera was displaying the exact same symbol of solidarity. In addition to distributing the ribbons, Hoda used her personal funds to purchase 20 large floral baskets filled entirely with yellow roses, which she physically placed along the edges of the main news desk and around the primary camera angles so that the entire broadcasting environment was completely dominated by the yellow color scheme. This highly coordinated visual campaign successfully generated a massive public reaction across the United States, prompting thousands of ordinary citizens to visit their local stores, purchase their own yellow ribbons, and physically tie them onto their car antennas and the front doors of their private homes to maintain public awareness. While the national television campaign continued to broadcast the yellow ribbons into millions of homes, Hoda maximized her digital influence by utilizing her personal Instagram account, which reached an audience of more than 2 million active followers who consumed her daily updates every single day. Hoda uploaded a specific photograph showing Savannah standing next to her mother, Nancy, and she deliberately avoided using any complicated emotional language or poetic metaphors in the text captions, choosing instead to write incredibly short and factual sentences about the severe medical reality of the situation. Hoda repeatedly typed out the specific facts that Nancy Guthrie urgently needed her prescription heart medication to survive, that the Guthrie family desperately wanted to recover their mother, and she always pasted the official 10-digit telephone number for the FBI tip line at the bottom of every single post. Because Hoda constantly used her massive social media platform to focus public attention on the kidnapping, she successfully generated enormous external pressure that effectively forced the federal law enforcement agencies and local police departments to maintain the Nancy Guthrie investigation as their absolute highest operational priority. While all of these television broadcasts and digital media posts constituted Hoda's highly visible public support strategy, she simultaneously established a highly private and strictly controlled daily communication routine with Savannah to ensure that her friend was physically surviving the ordeal. Every single evening, after Hoda had completely finished her television hosting duties in New York, and after Savannah had concluded her exhausting daily strategy meetings with the federal hostage negotiators in Arizona, Hoda picked up her telephone and dialed Savannah's private number. During these specific 30-minute phone conversations, Hoda actively enforced a strict conversational rule where she absolutely refused to ask Savannah any questions regarding the progress of the FBI investigation, the status of the $6 million Bitcoin transfer, or the discovery of any new criminal evidence. Hoda completely understood that forcing Savannah to repeat the terrifying logistical details of the kidnapping would only increase her psychological trauma. So, Hoda intentionally redirected all of the phone conversations toward delivering specific and necessary physical commands regarding Savannah's biological health. Speaking through the telephone receiver, Hoda firmly instructed Savannah to drink several glasses of water to prevent physical dehydration, explicitly ordered her to consume her entire portion of dinner food to maintain her physical energy, and commanded her to swallow medically approved sleep aids if her anxiety prevented her from resting her brain. Most importantly, Hoda used these private nightly phone calls to aggressively dismantle the psychological iron wall that Savannah was using to protect herself. speaking clearly into the telephone and explicitly telling Savannah that she was completely allowed to be weak and that she was fully permitted to cry. Hoda actively explained to Savannah that experiencing extreme physical terror over the potential death of an elderly mother was a perfectly normal human biological reaction. And she forcefully emphasized that Savannah did not need to maintain her fake posture of invincibility when she was speaking to her best friend. By simply remaining silent on the telephone line and refusing to hang up the receiver, Hoda successfully created a highly secure and private auditory space that finally allowed Savannah to release her built-up physical tension without worrying about being judged by the federal agents or the television audience. Throughout the entirety of the terrifying kidnapping crisis that dominated the month of February in 2026, Savannah Guthrie clearly demonstrated a massive internal conflict between the strict psychological rules that her mother had taught her in the past and the devastating physical reality of her current emergency situation. For exactly 38 years, Savannah had strictly governed her personal and professional life according to the specific educational philosophy established by Nancy Guthrie, which commanded her to remain as hard as solid iron and absolutely forbade any public display of emotional weakness or physical vulnerability. This deeply ingrained behavioral armor had previously functioned as an incredibly effective survival mechanism that allowed her to push through the unexpected death of her father in Mexico, survive the legal complexities of her first divorce, endure the biological trauma of a medical miscarriage, and aggressively climb to the absolute top of the competitive television news industry. However, when Savannah was forced to manage the highly complex criminal extortion case involving her mother's kidnapped body, this exact same psychological strength rapidly transformed into a dangerously heavy physical burden that threatened to completely destroy her biological health and mental stability. Savannah was actively forcing herself to carry far too many responsibilities at the exact same time, which included answering highly specific questions from federal agents, making the ultimate executive decisions regarding the transfer of $6 million in cryptocurrency, and constantly calculating the remaining hours before her mother's pacemaker would biologically fail. Because she strongly believed that any display of emotional panic would compromise her ability to function as the official family spokesperson and the primary legal negotiator. Savannah absolutely refused to allow herself even a single minute of physical relaxation or emotional release while standing in front of the security cameras, the federal investigators, and her extended family members. The biological price that Savannah had to pay for maintaining this extreme level of emotional suppression became highly visible on her physical body within just a few days of the initial kidnapping event in Arizona. Because her brain was constantly processing worst-case scenarios regarding her mother's medical condition, Savannah suffered from severe and continuous insomnia, which completely prevented her body from entering a restorative sleep cycle and caused her physical weight to drop significantly within a single 7-day period. The intense psychological pressure caused the specific muscle groups in her face and neck to become chronically stiff and painful, forcing her to rely almost entirely on the continuous consumption of black coffee to forcefully stimulate her nervous system and keep her physical body standing upright during the long FBI briefings. By aggressively forcing herself to act like an invincible legal and journalistic machine, Savannah was actively pushing her biological systems to the absolute edge of total physical exhaustion, creating a highly dangerous situation where her own coping mechanisms were causing more physical damage than the actual crisis itself. Despite the fact that Savannah was constantly surrounded by dozens of highly trained FBI agents, expensive financial lawyers, specialized cryptocurrency experts, and deeply concerned family members inside the Arizona field office, Hoda Kotb was the absolutely only person who possessed the ability to accurately identify Savannah's deteriorating physical condition, even though Hoda was physically located thousands of miles away inside a broadcasting studio in New York City. The massive geographical distance did not prevent her from recognizing the specific auditory clues that proved Savannah was slowly collapsing under the immense weight of the situation. by carefully listening through the telephone receiver. Hoda successfully detected the abnormally rapid breathing patterns in Savannah's chest, identified the slight physical trembling in Savannah's vocal cords when she tried to speak, and clearly saw the massive structural cracks forming in the ironclad psychological defense system that Savannah had spent decades building. Instead of encouraging Savannah to continue acting like a strong television hero for the American public, Hoda deliberately used her psychological interventions to create a necessary safety valve that allowed Savannah to depressurize her heavily stressed nervous system. During their late-night telephone conversations, Hoda actively stripped away all of Savannah's powerful professional titles, completely ignoring the fact that Savannah was a multi-million-dollar NBC television anchor and a highly educated legal doctor, so that Savannah could simply exist as a terrified 54-year-old daughter who was desperately afraid of losing her mother. Hoda's highly specific interventions completely redefined the standard parameters of workplace friendship, proving that their relationship had evolved far beyond the competitive limits of the corporate television industry and had transformed into an essential lifeline that actively kept Savannah tethered to reality during her darkest moments. Hoda did not waste her time offering useless poetic advice or empty emotional platitudes, but instead chose to execute highly practical rescue operations that directly solved Savannah's immediate problems, such as taking over her 3 a.m. broadcasting shift to protect her financial income and organizing the massive Yellow Ribbon campaign to manipulate the national media narrative. By aggressively managing the public relations aspect of the crisis and staying awake late into the night to serve as a private emotional pillar, Hoda successfully built an invisible protective shield around Savannah that allowed the exhausted journalist to temporarily drop her heavy iron armor. During this 2026 crisis, when Savannah was facing a catastrophic loss that possessed the power to permanently destroy her mental stability, she did not fall into the exact same state of isolated psychological repression that she had experienced as a 16-year-old teenager back in 1988. Because Hoda Kotb actively chose to sacrifice her own professional Olympic reporting assignments, physically coordinate the television media pressure, and firmly demand that her friend consume water and sleep medication, Savannah finally learned that true human strength does not require a person to constantly hold back their tears. Ultimately, these two women practically demonstrated that the greatest source of power during a catastrophic emergency comes directly from having a dedicated friend who is completely willing to manage your professional responsibilities and hold your physical body together when you finally decide to relax your muscles and allow yourself to collapse.